Welcome to the 20th episode of Tokyo Alumni Podcast. Today, our guest graduated ASIJ in 2010. She then went on to Vassar College, where she graduated with a major in philosophy and international studies. She also minored in economics and Arabic. She then returned to Tokyo for 1 year to work for ASIJ and coach volleyball and field hockey. She then moved to New York City to attend Columbia Law School. Upon graduating Columbia, she began her legal career at Simpson Thacher and Bartlett's New York office, where she completed rotations in the banking and credit and capital markets group. She recently transferred to Simpson Thacher's LA office, where she represents private equity funds, corporations, and banks in financing matters. She has also enjoyed doing pro bono legal work for the Natural Resource Defense Council. She currently lives in West LA with her husband, Eric, and her cat, Matcha. Welcome to the podcast, Janet.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Nick.
So today we are going all legal stuff, right? We're going to talk about becoming a lawyer, why become a lawyer, law school itself, as well as the various caveats within the practice of law once someone joins that field. And specifically, you have knowledge in regards to how someone graduating international school pursue a career in law, because their background would be quite unique. So let's just go in chronological order. At what point, you went to ASIJ, then Vassar, and then you interned at ASIJ. At what point did you know that you wanted to become a lawyer?
So I never had lawyers in my immediate family, so I didn't really grow up with this dream to become a lawyer or anything like that. But I was talking to one of my professors in college one day, and he kind of just suggested the idea of law school to me. And so based on that, I hadn't really been aware of what lawyers did or what that job looked like so far. So I thought I would try to obtain a summer internship, experience what law firm life was like. And I was looking at different law firms' Tokyo offices because I wanted to spend the summer living at home before my senior year. And I actually came across one of my ASIJ classmates who had worked at White & Case Tokyo's office as an intern the summer before. And usually it's pretty hard to get these positions as an undergrad. They usually only take, law students that are in their 1L or 2L years. So I was really intrigued by that. And I reached out to him, and he was so gracious. And he said he had a great experience there, and he gave me the email address of his supervisor. So I just kind of sent an email, resume and cover letter, stuff like that. And got an interview, and then kind of got my foot in the door through that. And then I spent that summer between my junior and senior year of college at White & Case Tokyo's office, helping out with some of their corporate matters with their M&A team. And I was just completely amazed, I think is the best way to describe it, to realize that almost all of the people I was working with had worked in both Tokyo and, New York or San Francisco or Canada or, these other places. And so I was really intrigued to find out that there was this profession that allowed people to work in different jurisdictions and different countries and, work with clients from all over the world. That was kind of the geographical flexibility that a legal career affords was one of the main driving factors. And I also found it really interesting day to day, just the work that they were doing was very related to contracts and helping companies achieve their goals. And I decided I wanted to figure out, am I interested in like laws themselves and legal research and stuff like that? So for my senior year, I went back to Vassar and wrote my senior thesis on the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the movement to try to end international bribery of government officials by, U.S. citizens or U.S. companies. And through that experience, all the research I was doing, I found it just really interesting to think about the international issues that come with enforcing these types of statutes. And I was a philosophy major, so I thought it was a great kind of way to combine all of my interests. I was interested in philosophy and economics and, just international relations. So this international law and international legal issues was intellectually really interesting to me. So yeah, it was the geographical flexibility that being a lawyer affords, and also this just sort of compelling field of international legal issues that I found were my most motivating factors.
So sort of rewinding it back to, what you were studying at Vassar, quite a Renaissance woman in the sense that the Arabic, economics, right, international relations, and philosophy. To be specific, I'm a bit curious about the Arabic element. So did that ever come to, play a role in as a life as a lawyer?
So I haven't used my Arabic directly, but I actually, when I was once I got to law school, in my first and second year summers, I interned at Simpson Thatcher's Tokyo office in the first year and the New York office in the second year. And in my second year summer, I was helping out with an asylum pro bono case, and we were representing a Saudi Arabian woman. And so it was really incredible to have that chance to even just, a few sentences go a really long way, especially when you're working with the client. I think can build that trust when you're first meeting them, if you just can show that you kind of can relate to them in some way. So that was probably potentially the only time I've had the chance to use my Arabic, but it was really meaningful, and I hope there are more opportunities to use it in the future. Yeah.
That sounds pretty like an incredible case too. An asylum seeker from Saudi Arabia in the U.S. and here's this half Japanese, half American girl speaking Arabic to her. That's quite the scenario. And you mentioned philosophy played a role. What exactly about law intrigued you in regards to its overlap with philosophy?
Yeah, so I guess when I was studying philosophy at Vassar, I would find myself just kind of staying awake at night after hearing about these thought experiments. And I'm sure, you've probably heard, and anyone who's listening has probably heard of these before, but there's things like the trolley problem where, you're faced with this trolley that's on a track that's about to hit 5 people. And if you have the power to flip a switch to divert the track that only kills 1 person, are you morally obligated to do so? Usually people would think yes, but then it's like, okay, well, what if it wasn't a switch and you could just push a large person onto the track to stop the train? Would you do that? Are you obligated to do that morally? Is it really all about maximizing the greater good, and, or is it about, not killing someone? There were just these issues that would keep me awake at night. And so kind of thinking about like, what are our morals as a society? I think through the senior thesis that I did, I realized that the criminalization of this, act of bribing people, this is really an enshrinement of our morals into laws, and like having these legal underpinnings throughout all of the action and everything that's going on day to day is kind of rooted in these philosophical decisions we're making about what we value as a society. So I think that was kind of the trigger for me, which is, just realizing that these philosophical ideas are kind of like underlying the laws that we have in every country. So I was really interested in that.
Yeah, the trolley problem, that seems to be more and more brought up in things like popular media. Like there's that Netflix show, have you seen it, called The Good Place?
Oh, I've heard of that. I've totally heard of that. I haven't seen it, but I've heard great things.
So yeah, if anyone ever has a chance, that show does a great job visualizing that trolley problem you mentioned. And obviously international relations goes right into, what you mentioned earlier about straddling, the Pacific Ocean, as well as really, globally in regards to law. And I guess we'll later get onto more of the caveats of how the jurisdictions change and how, what does it mean to be a quote unquote international lawyer. But sort of going back to this chronological order. So we have you at Vassar, you're studying these various topics. So you do this internship at White & Case, you graduate, and then you go to ASIJ briefly, your old stomping grounds. When you're there, what were you doing at ASIJ for a year?
So I was coaching middle school volleyball and high school field hockey. And I was also teaching in the study center for the middle school students. So it was kind of an ideal year because I love working with students and getting to know them. And especially I discovered I love coaching as well. And I'll never forget, there's those moments when you teach one of the girls how to do a skill and then like 2 weeks later they're able to do it, and just seeing that progress so tangibly, and like the skill of flicking a field hockey ball into a net a certain way. I just found that really gratifying and really fun and just a fantastic experience. So it was a job that wasn't sort of all consuming and like, causing me to work on the weekends so that I could have some time to spend time with my family and also, write my application essays and study for the LSAT and all that stuff. So it was a great opportunity to reconnect with all of the ASIJ faculty and students and be home in Tokyo for a year.
So this application to law school, right? It's it's a very onerous process. There's the LSATs, and there's writing the applications to the various schools. When you were going through this process, was Columbia always on the forefront of your mind, like the East Coast and New York? Or, being from an international school, were you open towards other options, maybe even outside the USA?
I was considering the US probably most heavily because, I had gone to the US every summer when I was younger. So I would spend a year in Tokyo and then go to like a summer camp in the US. So I just felt pretty familiar with the US, but I didn't really consider like Europe or other, Canada or other countries. I think I was kind of just focused on the US. But in terms of specific law schools, it's actually, this kind of also ties back to an ASIJ story, but because I had loved my experience at Vassar so much and being in a really small liberal arts school environment where it was not competitive at all, and the class sizes were really small and you could really get to know the professors easily and have, lots of collegiality. I actually wasn't considering any of the larger law schools at all when I was originally applying. And it wasn't until I went to Winterfest at ASIJ and talked to one of the parents of one of my classmates who I graduated with, who is a lawyer, and he actually said to me, you really should consider the bigger schools as well because, you've got nothing to lose. Like, why don't you just apply to them? And, it's not just about the small class size, but it's about having like a network in the future and having a strong name brand on your record. So kind of based on that conversation, I switched gears and then added all these applications that I hadn't submitted before that. So Columbia was not originally on my list. But then it sort of made its way on my list after that conversation.
Interesting. And then obviously things work out very well. You end up at Columbia. When you were at Columbia, it's a 3-year process. How does the whole what would be your like 1 to 2 minute summary for, law school for dummies in regards to what the first year, second year, third year would entail and what the summers perhaps in between each year would entail?
Law school, as you said, it's 3 years. If you are pursuing a position at a big law firm, the hiring process happens during your first year summer. So there's an intense amount of pressure to do well academically your first year, which can cause probably any law school in the US to feel pretty competitive that first year, not necessarily among the students, but just kind of with yourself to just try to do your best academically, because the firms will only have 1 year of grades to go off of when they're making the hiring decisions. So that can cause a lot of, I think, stress and anxiety for law students throughout the country. That's sort of just how the system has been set up. And so the first year you have a set number of courses that you take no matter what law school you go to. And those are civil procedure, contracts, torts, criminal law, constitutional law, and property. Interestingly, those are all tested on a bar exam that you need to pass in order to be a practicing lawyer. So you're kind of getting your foundation in that first year. And those courses are all what you call black letter law classes. So you're really just reading cases, hundreds of pages every day. And it's a lot of, in a nutshell, I would say law school is a lot of reading. And the other kind of distinguishing feature as compared to an undergraduate institution is teaching style is that law school is typically conducted using the Socratic method. So if anyone's seen The Paper Chase, the movie, it's kind of like that, where you're sitting in this huge lecture hall with 95 other people and the professor says, Mr. Harris, please describe the facts of the case to us. And then you're expected to describe all of them. And then he'll come up with a follow-up question, say, what if the facts were tweaked in this way, or what was the dissenting opinion? And you're just supposed to be able to, present the case to your whole class. And in Columbia, you have microphones at everyone's desk. So you have to affirmatively turn on your microphone. And I found it extremely stressful. I remember one time in my federal income tax class, I was cold called for 33 minutes straight. And I was my hand was shaking the whole time. But, I think now that I've been practicing, it's actually really good preparation for real life situations when you'll have a client call and ask you something and you just kind of on the spot have to have the ability to answer without freaking out about it. But so anyway, in a nutshell, the first year is this intense time where you're getting cold called all the time and you're taking these black letter law classes. After the summer, once you have your interviews and you get your offer to be a summer associate in your for your second year. Then the second and third years are much more relaxed because at that point you pretty much have your job offer lined up. And these summer associate positions, I would say 99% of the time end up with, turning into full-time offers. So once you finish that August after your first year, you're pretty much set for your, starting career. So the second and third years, you can take electives and take classes you're interested in and kind of just make it your own or be a research assistant or, kind of just get involved in the way that you would like.
When you're doing that second and third year, so the first year, obviously, there's a lot of pressure. The cold calling with microphones sounds terrifying. But I guess you said there's payoff at the end because it's a real life skill. And one thing I know off air, we spoke a little bit about how I actually, at one point in my career, wanted to be a lawyer. And I remember so this is even before, applying to law school and going to law school, there was always this trepidation I've had towards, well, what happens if I don't pass the bar? What is sort of the mentality of students, at least that were around you, that second and third year when they're preparing for the bar? And is it, I've seen the percentages, and I mean, they were surprisingly high, if I'm not mistaken, some like 20%, 30%, even from the better schools fail the bar. So did you see any students who had everything set, they're ready to go, and they fail? And in that case, what's sort of the recourse they take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very real issue comes up, especially the California bar is definitely, from what I've heard, the hardest bar exam in the US. And, if you fail it the first time, usually the law firms will give you one more chance and then you can take it. The bar exams are typically administered in July and February. So if you fail the July bar, you can take it again in February. Beyond that, I don't know, I think it might be a case where you are going to have to find a new job once you, pass ultimately, but it's definitely a real consideration. And people take the studying for the bar exam very seriously. The process for that is, I think second and third year, a lot of people, at least at Columbia, didn't really focus on preparing so much for the bar exam, but kind of more took classes they were interested in, or if they had a specific practice area they wanted to learn more about substantively, they would focus on that. But then right after you graduate in May, you have this, it's about 8 to 10 weeks of this period where you're not working. Your job typically isn't going to start till September or October. So you have these precious, 2.5 months where all you're doing is studying. And most of the big law firms pay for a course. There's many companies that, for example, one of them is called Barbary. And this is kind of like a crash course in all of the information you need to know for every subject in order to pass the bar. So there's these crash courses that really help you hone in on the exact way you need to write the essays and how you answer the multiple choice, because even law school itself doesn't really teach you that level of detail a lot of the time. So it's, there's definitely a sort of system set up into place to help you prepare for the bar if you go to a big law firm that they will help you with.
That's incredibly interesting, that corporation. So you're saying if they know there's a resource, they know there's someone they really want to hire, they will invest in that person in the form of giving them months of preparation that they pay for the bar exam.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, you're not getting paid a salary, for those months, but they will pay for you to take that course and pay for the bar exam itself and help you prepare in the way that you need. So.
Oh yeah, I had no idea about that system. So that's incredible. So as long as you have a firm that trusts you and believes in you before you graduate that third year, you have a much more sort of clear path towards becoming a lawyer upon graduation, it seems like. Does that mean, to the contrary, there is a population of students who maybe weren't so lucky in job hunting their first, second, third year, and those students just basically have to go study on their own, like at Starbucks or whatever, or pay these companies, you said, was it Barbary, different firms that, offer the prep, and then they get their, JD, and then they have to go job hunting. And I guess that's also not that uncommon.
I would say, so that's a really good question. And that completely depends on the law school that you go to. And so in the case of Columbia, I had very few people in my class that situation happened to. I think every single one of the people in my section, which was like 95 people, got kind of the job that they were hoping for. And I think that's actually a draw for why a lot of people choose to go to Columbia to begin with, even though it's extremely expensive, because the employment rates are really high. And so, people are making this investment in themselves up front, that, if I go to this type of school, then I'm going to have a good chance of getting a big law firm offer, and then I can kind of see my progression from there. But I think, definitely at some of the schools that are maybe less well known, that's probably much more common. And I think it's a very real consideration that students should think hard about when deciding whether they should go to law school or not. Because, if you make the decision to invest all this time and effort and the tuition, to go to law school, you want to make sure that you're going to a place that has a strong employment record and will help you get a position that will set you up to not be in debt for a lot of years.
Interesting. And then the bar itself, very long, very exhausting. How was that experience for you?
Oh, wow. It was grueling, to say the least. I got 1 hour of sleep before the first of the 2 days of testing, and it was very, very difficult for me. You're in this big, basically room with 1,000 people, and you can't bring a cell phone. You can only bring one plastic bag with, a couple pencils or whatever, and maybe your laptop. But it was very stressful, and it was funny. After I took the bar exam, I kind of said to myself, or when I was studying, I was motivating myself by saying, I'm never going to take another test again in my life. This is the last test ever. And then, of course, I moved to California, so now I have to go through this process all over again, because not all of the states transfer to each other. So, like, a New York bar exam, passage will allow you to practice in, Washington, D.C. or Massachusetts, or, you can kind of wave into these jurisdictions through their reciprocity systems. But California is not one of those. So I never thought I would be putting myself in this position. But
so are you taking the bar test, like the California version of the bar test in the near future?
Yeah, I will have to, probably sometime in the coming year or so, but it's definitely on the horizon, unfortunately.
So when you graduate, the Ivy Leagues, places like UCLA, Stanford, generally speaking, graduating from a better school usually ensures one better employment, whether it's in the field of medicine or the field of accounting and so on. And then there's some fields where it's less important, like my field in teaching, it seems to be less relevant. Now, in the field of law, especially when I was pursuing or thinking about pursuing that route, I was told over and over again how it is quite important in regards to which law school you attend. So would you say from your experience through recruitment and whatnot and seeing other students in other schools, does this ring true in the field of law that which school you attend really affects your employment?
I would say for big law hiring, it can play a really big impact. If you are looking to be at one of these large law firms, particularly in their U.S. offices, it's really helpful to have gone to one of the top-ranked schools, especially for big law hiring. They have a whole recruitment system that has very strong relationships with a lot of these highly ranked schools. It's not impossible to get these positions from the not as well-known schools, and there's definitely cases. I know many people that I've worked for or worked with at my law firm who are not from the famously grouped T14 schools. But I just, to be completely honest, I think it's a lot easier coming from those schools just because you have this clear-cut pathway with the law firms coming directly to recruit there. So I think it's definitely something to keep in mind when choosing a school, is looking at their employment rate and making sure that it's going to have a high chance of getting you the type of position that you want to pursue. And the one difference that I would point out is there's many other types of law besides big law. And, if you want to be in family law or immigration law or work for a smaller boutique firm, you can also do public interest work and do things that are for the greater good, from like a more NGO standpoint. And there's the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. There's just all these other options that are not in this sort of one set track hiring process. I think it's probably all right, from what I've heard at least, it's less important to go to this specific, highly ranked school in order to pursue those other more varied types of law. So I would definitely say it depends on the industry you're hoping to enter.
That's really intriguing. So you brought up this concept of big law. So again, for sort of the novice, what do you mean when you say big law?
It refers to large law firms that I'm trying to think of the exact number of employees they have. I think there's a certain threshold. It might be over 100 or something like that. But they typically have multiple offices. Many of them have international offices as well. But the kind of one of the main things that keeps them pretty similar is that their salary is the same across all of them, usually. There have been a few exceptions to this in this COVID era where certain firms are reducing the salaries, but the kind of classic big law model is that once certain law firms change the salary scale, many of the other ones will follow so that they exactly match the salary scale. In my mind, when I think of big law firms, I typically think of the firms that have this sort of, very similar lockstep compensation scale where everyone in the same class year at that particular firm is going to make the same base salary. And then also typically the clients they're representing will be corporations or banks or, just these large, maybe government entities, just these large institutions.
That's really intriguing. So there's big law, and as you mentioned, there's so many other types of law. So what drew you towards, what you do currently? And I think this is also a good chance to touch upon the idea of pro bono. I had to Google it before our interview that I think it means for the public good, if I'm not mistaken. And what exactly does that entail? And I see it in the movies all the time. Is it actually free? And how often do lawyers do it? Because free work is rare. People rarely do anything for free. So is there a catch I'm missing?
For the first question, sort of what drew me to big law, I think, so my experience in the Tokyo office of White & Case was kind of the first thing that prompted me to be interested in working at a large law firm, because I was hoping to go to a firm that had a New York office and a Tokyo office so that I could work, in both countries in the long run. And I went interned at Simpson Thatcher's Tokyo office in my first year summer and the New York office in my second year summer. And I just really liked the people that I was working with. And it was kind of a very consistent atmosphere of people just really willing to help me and teach me things and try to help me improve as a lawyer. And so I was interested in joining this environment where it just seemed very collegial and just, with people that were out there to help you, sort of not so competitive among the associates. So that was sort of my decision to go to big law was really affirmed through those internships and experiencing it, and the work environment and the types of matters were extremely interesting. The clients are these, you'll see them in the Wall Street Journal all the time. They're just, the matters are just really exciting. And it's been a great opportunity this spring, actually, too, because given everything happening with COVID and this time of, economic crisis for many companies, we were able to represent some large retailers and help them get some loans that enable them not to face bankruptcy and not have to fire thousands of their employees. So there's been kind of really meaningful ways that this work is not only interesting, but it feels like you're making an impact in a time of need. So kind of going along with that pro bono question, another factor that I considered when I was choosing a firm, because even within this big law firm arena, there's different cultures among the various firms. And one thing that my firm was really, had a really strong commitment to was this pro bono practice. And there are so many different types of pro bono work that you can do. We get emails about them more than once a week, kind of encouraging you to take on these matters. And one of my favorite clients that I've represented on a pro bono basis, which, as you mentioned, you don't get paid for it. But at Simpson, one thing that I really liked about their staffing model is that the pro bono work counts as billable work. Like when you're entering into your timesheets, the time you spend is sort of comes up in the same, it's like the same color as the billable matters that you put in. So that was really important to me when choosing a firm, because I think that really shows the commitment. So one of my favorite clients was the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I had the chance to represent them last spring in one of their financing matters. And it just really showed me that even these non-government organizations and organizations that are really trying to act for the greater good can also use the help of people with corporate legal knowledge. I thought that was really gratifying. And I've also represented a yoga organization called Crossover Yoga Project, and they bring these mindfulness and yoga into these prisons to help people that have faced trauma. So it's been really gratifying, and I've found that the people that I've worked with on those matters have been fantastic people and really willing to put in the time, even if it causes you to work, later than you would have otherwise.
That sounds like an excellent model that these companies have that to make it a billable part of your work. And is this idea of sort of companies, so that basically they're taking on the onus in regards to, it seems like the time and, what would be normally money they would make, going towards corporate social responsibility types of issues. Is this a common trend throughout the big law world? And has this been going on for a while, or is it something that's arisen in the past few years or decades?
I'm not exactly sure when it started, but I think it's been going on for a while. But I think there's definitely varying degrees. Some firms may have it available, but they may not, reward you if you do it and allow you to count it as billable time, or not have as many options that are in place. But I've just really enjoyed it. It's kind of nice to use the skills that you're learning for causes that you're passionate about. And there's always more work to be done, obviously, but I think it's a great way to start. One other thing that I think it's really important to highlight is that this is a really good time for anyone with Japanese language ability to be going to law school. There's so few people that end up going to U.S. law schools that are able to speak Japanese or have, any connection to Japan at all. And in fact, in my Columbia graduating class of, I think it was about 400 people, I was the only person that had grown up in Tokyo, or in Japan even, I think, from everyone I had talked to. And there were a couple people who had lived in Japan through the JET program, or maybe had, were of Japanese descent, but there was almost no one else, that was, able to speak Japanese, and also interested in working there. A couple of people, but really almost not many others. So in terms of, from the hiring perspective, many of these U.S. big law firms have Tokyo offices, and there's always a need for a pipeline of people that have this Japanese language ability. So I just think it's a fantastic time for people from the international schools in Tokyo, especially because many of the people listening probably have this ability to speak Japanese and or familiarity with Tokyo, interested in living there in the future. I think it's a great time for them to go to law school because I think these firms will definitely be interested in hiring them. Another thing is going along with that in terms of how you actually work in Tokyo if you've gone to a U.S. law school is you'll take one of the bar exams in the U.S., probably New York or California or, wherever you're going to practice. I think it's a good idea to spend a couple years there if possible, kind of becoming, whether it's a New York lawyer or wherever it is that you're starting. Because then if you try to go to practice in Tokyo after that, you'll be eligible to be a gaiben, which is short for Gaikukuho Jumu Bengoshi. And it's a certification where you can become a registered foreign lawyer. And although you won't have the ability to actually litigate cases, and go to trial in Japan, you can be a just full practicing corporate lawyer and represent companies and everything else, basically. So I think it's a great kind of pathway for anyone who is interested in working in multiple countries, whether it's the US and Tokyo or, I don't know, London and Tokyo or something, but who wants to have the option to work in Japan in the future. It's a great option as a career.
Yeah, that's incredible. There's 400 graduates and you were the only one who spoke Japanese fluently in your class at Columbia.
There may have been a couple more, who were able to, but yeah, who also wanted to work in Tokyo. Almost no one else. Another small plug that I would give specifically for Columbia, for anyone who's interested in Japanese legal issues or working in Japan in the future, is they have a really strong Center for Japanese Legal Studies. And there's, a course on Japanese law you can take. There's an entire library that's filled just with Japanese legal, literature, which is pretty unique even compared to the other law schools in the U.S. So I think, you'll feel very at home if you go to school there and they have a lot of really close relationships with law firms in Japan and both U.S. and Japanese law firms in Tokyo. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities.
That's really intriguing. So this whole Japan-U.S. law, connection. And we spoke about this a bit off air. There's this word, quote unquote, international lawyer. You mentioned the gaiben. So if someone was to pursue law in more than one country, and I'm sure, you've worked, with people around the world, how common is it for someone to have? Would it be common for someone to have a bar certification in more than one country? And do you ever work with people who have passed the bar both in like the States and in England? Or is this not so common because it's not really necessary?
So that's a really good question. It's actually more common than you might think. A lot of these law schools have these specific programs called LLM programs, which is kind of like a master of laws, and it's set up for individuals who have worked in a different country for several years and then want to be eligible to take the U.S. one of the U.S. bar exams. So, for example, every year, in addition to the 400 JDs, Columbia has 300 LLMs from all over the world. There's usually about 20 from Japan. There's people from China, Korea, England, all over Europe, all over the world. And they can sit for the New York bar, and then sometimes they'll work at law firms in New York, and then they'll obviously have both the New York bar passage and also they'll have passed the bar in their home jurisdiction. So there's many people who have this capability, and I think it's so impressive, especially for people that are taking one of these U.S. based bar exams, with English as their second language. I'm so in awe of them that they're able to do that. So yeah, very much respect for people that are able to do more than one.
Yeah, that's incredible that people would do it in both countries when it seems like just getting one is difficult enough, right? So today was all about law. It was, why go to law school itself, the bar test, the process of preparation and the various sectors of law, including pro bono, which means for the community or something like that. So I like to conclude it with what is to come, right? What is coming up in your life the next few months, next few years, next few decades. So yeah, the floor is yours, and please take it away, Janet.
Well, I will have to share with everyone, I don't know if we mentioned this yet, but I just moved from New York to California. I was, it was a very different lifestyle in New York. We were kind of in the apartment for 6 days a week, and then would only leave to go get groceries in this whole coronavirus era. So just being out here in LA, where we have a car now, and being able to go outside without taking public transportation and feeling more free to do so has been a huge improvement, sort of just mentally for me. So I'm really hoping in the next few years to be able to take advantage of access to the outdoors. My husband and I love hiking, and we're planning to go backpacking this fall in Arizona, so we'll see how that goes. But it's just kind of a fun, exciting time to be in the West Coast. I've never lived here before, so I'm excited to just explore a little bit more if possible. Work is always busy, but on vacations and stuff, it's possible to kind of unplug a bit usually. And yeah, just kind of hoping to learn as much as I can, become a better lawyer, of course, but just kind of continue learning in the world and continue to stay in touch. I love staying in touch with my friends from college and law school and ASIJ and everything. So probably just hoping to deepen those relationships even more, and yeah, just kind of carry on.
Well, thank you for being on the finale of season 2. This is actually the 20th episode. I'm happy you mentioned the West Coast is the best coast, and best of luck on that JD exam, although I'm sure you don't need it, or bar exam. Yeah, bar exam. I'll try to edit that, right? I don't know how it's going to sound like it all messed up. And yeah, so hopefully our paths will cross somewhere. And again, thank you for being on our podcast, and see you around.
Thank you so much.